I know one of the hardest questions that every person grapples with at some point or another in their life is the question of suffering. Why? It's a tough one to grapple with it. No one likes to suffer, at least not that I've met. And it's not fun to go through, and it feels unfair. I think we can all agree on that, right? Today we're going to do some heart work, that's what I want to call it. And I hope you're ready, and I just want you to prepare for God to do something in you today. I would guess that most of us in here have probably encountered a situation that left us with more questions than answers. Maybe something happened that left you feeling betrayed, alone, hurt, maybe ashamed. I want you to close your eyes again and go back to that memory. Maybe it was just a distant hurt that you've put behind you and you're trying to keep behind you. Or maybe it was something that happened pretty recently. When I was preparing for this message, one instance came to mind that personally happened to me when we were serving in Spain. We had been in Spain about less than a year when I found out that we were pregnant with our second, and our oldest daughter was around 2 at the time. We were excited and nervous and had to navigate challenges of finding an OB and navigating care in another culture and learning another language. And we had just announced that we were pregnant with baby number 2 when I went in for a 16-week checkup and was told there was no heartbeat. I'll spare you details, but essentially my doctor just wanted me to go into labor naturally, which happened while I was walking home from the doctor's office, and I ended up with a lot of complications. So we called an ambulance, but because of my age, they said that I was basically healthy enough and I could wait for an ambulance. But I couldn't because of complications, so Nick ended up having to get a taxi and put me in the taxi so we can make it to the hospital, where I ended up passing out when I got there. Because of the circumstances, we ended up having to go to the closest hospital, which meant my English-speaking OB couldn't come. And while we had a good grip on the language and a good understanding, it was still hard to be in a medical setting without having been in that country super long. I remember waking up from the anesthesia after my procedure in the labor and delivery ward, which is just cruel in and of itself. And I remember hearing the nurses say that they didn't know why I was crying, but they didn't want to say anything because they knew I wouldn't understand. I remember feeling helpless, alone, and confused in that moment and wondering why that was happening. I mean, after all, we were thousands of miles away from family and from friends. We had just sold everything to follow the call of God, and this was happening. Why? I think in general, our tendency is to sink into isolation when we feel pain and self-pity when the world is not going the way we want it to. But the Bible puts us in our place. No pain that we face hasn't already been nailed to the cross with Jesus. And Jesus was close and so near to me in that moment. And I remember laying there thinking, I have a choice, either to invite Jesus into the situation or to stay stuck in my questions. I experienced his comfort and closeness like I had never had before in that moment. And I know there's some things that you are going through that are far worse than what I had been through, and it's not a comparison of who's been through what more badly. That's not a word. It's not a competition is what I'm trying to say. But I want you to hold on to that thought you thought of, because we are going to come back to it. His position is to our advantage. No pain that we face hasn't already been nailed to that cross. And it should give us comfort knowing that not only does he sympathize and understands, but his position is to our advantage for us now. Listen to Hebrews chapter 8, verse 1 and 2. He says, here's the main point. We have a high priest who sat down in the place of honor beside the throne of the majestic God in heaven. There he ministers in the heavenly tabernacle, the true place of worship that was built by the Lord and not by human hands. Right now, today, we can live in the absolute assurance that Jesus is more powerful than anything we encounter here in this world. His intangible influence emanating from heaven is stronger than your stresses, your struggles, your anxieties, your enemies, your fears, your pressures, your guilt, your shame, or whatever holds us here. At times, it may seem that the kingdom of this world reigns as the ultimate ruler, but it's our true and better King Jesus who declares, heaven is my throne and earth is my footstool. Jesus is bigger and better and more powerful today for you, right now, for whatever you might be facing. And he truly understands what you're going through and what you have gone through. But maybe you're sitting here thinking, okay, that's great. When external circumstances happen, obviously it's understandable that Jesus cares for us because it's outside of our control. But what if you personally have gotten yourself into a mess because of your sin? Maybe you're thinking what you thought of was a situation caused by your sin, and you think that there's no way Jesus is sympathizing with you in that. But I want you to listen. We are declared right with God, not once we begin to get our act together, but once we collapse into honest acknowledgement that we will never get our act together on our own. I'm going to say that again. We are declared right with God, not once we begin to get our act together, but once we collapse into honest acknowledgement that we will never get our act together on our own. And church, that's good news for us today. So Jesus is doing two specific things in heaven right now that I want to talk about. He's interceding for us, and he's advocating for us. And there's a difference. Interceding is simply a third party between two others. Jesus is what stands between us and God now, and it's he who covers our sins and makes us righteous. He calls us righteous, and it's not our own, and we didn't deserve it. It means that he stepped in on our behalf and was a sacrifice once and for all, and so that even when someone 2,000 plus years later decides to put their faith in Jesus, it applies to them too. He intercedes for us. Let's look at 1 John chapter 1:8. I think it'll be on the screen, and I'll read through it, chapter 2. If we claim we have no sin, we are only fooling ourselves and not living in the truth. But if we confess our sins to him, he is faithful and just to forgive our sins and to cleanse us from all wickedness. If we claim we have not sinned, we are calling God a liar and showing that his word has no place in our hearts. My dear children, I am writing this to you so that you will not sin. But if anyone does sin, we have an advocate who pleads our case before the Father. He is Jesus Christ, the one who is truly righteous. He himself is the sacrifice that atones for our sins, and not only our sins, but the sins of all the world. Jesus Christ, the righteous. And I like that Paul points out that if you sin, anybody sins, everybody sins, and even after you decide to follow Jesus, you probably and most likely 100% will sin again. And that's why Jesus is advocating for us right now. He intercedes for our general sinfulness as a whole, but he advocates and is advocating for our specific sin instances. Did you know that? So not only did our sinful nature as a whole nail him to the cross, but specific instances in sin that you and I commit yesterday, today, tomorrow, he's going before the Father and advocating for us individually. It's so wonderful and personal. The word advocate is a term that's used in the court of law. And I think that picture really paints a wonderful image of what he's doing for us right now. It means a person who pleads on someone else's behalf. Think about it. Jesus, the perfect one, who had to endure the weight of our sins, the weight of the world on the cross, was crucified by the very people he came to save, and he's now pleading on our behalf, like right now. And it's not because of anything that you have done or that you can do, it's simply because he loves you. There's nothing we can do to earn him to advocate for us or to advocate more or better. There's no sum we could pay to have him do this for us and to have him represent us in heaven. He's the third party between the two others. And he's so much more than a casual observer.